It's kind of funny, isn't it, that while the rest of Europe was busy burning people, Wales seemed almost untouched by the major witch trials. They definitely had people with prophetic gifts, people who were intuitive and psychically attuned. But where the powerful church establishment dominated, these gifted individuals were almost always put under suspicion. If you look closely, you'll see a historical pattern here. Throughout time, anyone who possessed these powerful, intuitive gifts was either thrown into mental institutions or, even more dramatically, burned at the stake. They were often like natural-born prophets, kind of like a Moses figure, but outside the established power structure. Now, let's consider where the Welsh people came from. They were descendants of the Celtic tribes. That instantly tells you something huge. The powers that be killed off all the Druids long before they even started calling people witches. And where did this systematic campaign originate? It all started with the rise of the Catholic Church. They were systematically eliminating the Druids before they managed to take over the spiritual landscape everywhere else. And after the Druids were mostly gone, they hunted down anyone who likely still held on to that ancient Druidic culture or knowledge. They weren't randomly targeting people. They were after specific individuals, the ones who had the potential to challenge their newfound power and authority. From the Church's perspective, these people were the ultimate enemy because they possessed a spiritual connection that bypassed the need for the institution. It's clear that so many people are ignorant of this history simply because they lack the background knowledge. But once you start digging into this stuff and putting the patterns together, the truth becomes glaringly clear. So, they used fire and persecution back then. What do they use today? Well, now they just subtly put fluoride in your public water supply. The result? Your pineal gland shrinks and hardens. And just like that, they've fixed everybody. Think about it. They get you reliant on public water systems. They control the water supply, and through that, they subtly shut down your natural, spiritual, and psychic gifts. Then, if that fails, they medicate you heavily through the established medical system. That explains why they so aggressively go after anyone who promotes alternative medicine, the original, natural medicine, because that is exactly what the Druids practiced. The suppression of natural healing and intuition is a consistent historical strategy. But the biggest long-term control mechanism they implemented wasn't fire or chemicals. It was gender regulation. Ask yourself, why is there this pervasive, almost universal concept that God is exclusively male? The answer is shockingly simple. If God is definitively male, then the men who rule the earth, the kings, the popes, the emperors, can easily insert themselves as God's representatives, or even quasi-gods. This makes it infinitely easier to convince and control the masses. I truly believe the ultimate, long-term plan was for them to get people to fundamentally believe that they, the powerful, institutionalized men, were the true creator, the ultimate source of divine power, and eventually erase the authentic source altogether. Think about the psychology behind this. If people can simply digest the idea that God can be a human person, then all that remains is to trick them into believing that one of them is that divine representative. Once they achieve that, people start idolizing a fallible person, a proxy, and not the true, vast, unknowable creator. That, my friends, was the ultimate deception. Who are people unknowingly idolizing when they focus purely on a male deity represented by human institutions? Remember how the Roman emperors constantly tried to force people to believe they were gods? This pattern has deep, ancient roots. I don't think this deception has entirely succeeded across humanity, but it has certainly distorted our reality. If you are conditioned to believe that God could be a person, you are highly susceptible when someone in a position of power tells you he is God. It's a perfect form of brainwashing. And isn't it highly revealing that God is almost universally referred to as a he? That, right there, gives their whole agenda away. Now, let's move to the concept that this male God supposedly has a son. Doesn't that immediately and subtly make men look inherently more important, more divine than women? Why, in this powerful patriarchal narrative, did God never have a daughter? That idea just smells like a deeply fishy, highly political agenda. And if you look closely, they are leaving historical tracks everywhere. Why is this a gender issue at all? Because what was created on Earth was male and female. Duality is fundamental to existence. If duality exists in the physical realm, it must also exist in the divine realm. Who but men obsessed with terrestrial power structures would twist this narrative and make the divine inherently unequal? Inquiring minds really do want to know. Let's be clear, God is not a he. If any single being were to truly represent the fundamental source of creation, it would have to embody both the male and the female, the yin and the yang, the full spectrum of energy. The people who pushed this purely male deity concept had zero understanding of the divine beyond the confines of their earthly, power-hungry perspectives. And no wonder the men of the church subsequently thought themselves superior to women. Of course, they did, because their God supposedly had a son, not a daughter, implying women don't fully count in the cosmic equation. And isn't it convenient how the entire story of Adam and Eve was twisted to place all the blame squarely onto the woman? I wonder who had the motive to influence that particular interpretation. As a result of this twisting, women were framed as damned from the beginning and damned throughout history. The evil-spawned, sinful woman ended up conveniently being labeled a witch as well. Ultimately, men in positions of power simply took their societal wrath and insecurity out on all women. And I think, in their own twisted minds, they truly believed they were doing God a favor by enforcing this strict, mal-demonized hierarchy. This deep dive into history shows us the continuous methods used to suppress intuition, control population, and regulate gender roles for the sake of institutional power. Thank you for listening, and remember to look beyond the surface. Follow for more truth bombs.